In the stillness of a remote Iranian desert, the silence of April 24, 1980, was broken not by wind or wildlife, but by the heavy thrum of approaching American helicopters. This was the beginning of Operation Eagle Claw, an ambitious attempt by the United States to rescue 52 American hostages held captive in Tehran. For nearly half a year, the crisis had gripped the nation. Every evening, television screens flashed images of blindfolded Americans in front of jeering crowds. Every day, newspapers chronicled the stalemate between Washington and Iran's revolutionary leaders. The hostages had become symbols of American helplessness, and President Jimmy Carter, under growing pressure, turned to a desperate plan. The mission unfolding that night in the desert promised either redemption or ruin. The operation was designed with complexity that demanded absolute precision. It drew together the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps, each responsible for a critical piece of the plan. 8 Navy RH-53D Sea Stallion helicopters would depart from the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz, stationed in the Arabian Sea. Their destination was a remote stretch of desert, codenamed Desert 1. At that site, they were to meet Air Force C-130 Hercules transport planes carrying Delta Force commandos and barrels of jet fuel. After refueling, the helicopters would transport the commandos to a second hideout, closer to Tehran. From there, under cover of darkness, the assault team would strike the U.S. Embassy, overwhelm Iranian guards, free the hostages, and spirit them out of the country. It was a bold, risky plan, inspired in part by Israel and U.S. daring success at Entebbe in 1976. But where Israel executed seamless precision, Eagle Claw began to unravel almost immediately. As the helicopters lifted off from the carrier and crossed into Iranian airspace, they encountered an unexpected and terrifying phenomenon. A massive wall of sand rose from the desert floor, an ungodly sandstorm. The pilots, already flying low to avoid radar detection, were engulfed in choking brown dust. Visibility plummeted to near zero. Engines groaned under the strain as the abrasive particles clogged filters and scratched rotor blades. Inside cockpits, pilots compared the conditions to flying blind through smoke. One helicopter's hydraulic system failed, forcing it to turn back. Another, disoriented in the storm, aborted its mission and returned to the carrier. By the time the remaining helicopters staggered into Desert 1, the mission was already hours behind schedule. The crews were exhausted, visibility was poor, and the rendezvous with the waiting C-130s unfolded in confusion. Then came more bad news. One of the 6 helicopters that arrived was declared mechanically unfit to continue. That left only 5. The plan required a minimum of 6 to move forward. Colonel Charles Beckwith, commander of Delta Force, and his superiors on the ground agonized over the choice, but the math was unforgiving. Reluctantly, they decided to abort the mission. The withdrawal, however, proved more dangerous than the operation itself. In the darkness, with engines roaring and sand still whipping across the desert, one helicopter attempted to reposition. The pilot misjudged his distance. The massive rotor blades struck the fuselage of a nearby C-130 Hercules loaded with fuel and personnel. The collision tore through metal and ignited a fireball that consumed both aircraft. The explosion lit the desert in a blinding orange glow. Screams were drowned by the roar of burning fuel. 8 American servicemen were killed instantly. Survivors scrambled into the remaining transports, leaving behind wreckage, classified materials, and the bodies of their comrades. Desert 1, once the launching point of a daring mission, became a graveyard of shattered equipment and broken hopes. News of the failure spread quickly. For the hostages still confined in Tehran, the attempt was a flicker of hope that ended in despair. Iranian guards wasted no time telling them that America had tried and failed. For the revolutionary government led by Ayatollah Khomeini, the botched rescue was nothing short of a divine gift. Officials declared the disaster a miracle, proof that God had shielded the Islamic Revolution. The propaganda value was immense. Hardliners seized the moment to rally the population, silence moderates, and cement the regime's authority. The hostages, already pawns in a larger political struggle, now became trophies of defiance, ensuring they would remain captive for many more months. Internationally, the consequences were severe. America's allies in NATO, watching closely, expressed sympathy but privately questioned Washington's competence. Adversaries, especially the Soviet Union, saw weakness in the failure. The image of a superpower humbled by sand, machinery, and misfortune was a stark contrast to America's Cold War reputation for strength. In the Middle East, where power and perception mattered greatly, regional leaders recalibrated their view of U.S. influence. America no longer looked untouchable. At home, the fallout was brutal. President Jimmy Carter, already weakened by inflation, an energy crisis, and a faltering economy, could not escape the symbolic weight of the failure. The charred wreckage at Desert One became an emblem of his presidency's struggles. Critics painted him as indecisive and ineffective, and the failed mission reinforced that narrative. By the time the 1980 presidential election approached, the disaster at Desert One had become a central issue. Ronald Reagan, promising strength and renewal, seized on the moment, presenting himself as the leader who would restore American pride. Carter's chances of re-election evaporated, and the hostages' eventual release on the very day Reagan was inaugurated seemed to underline the passing of one era and the dawn of another. But perhaps the most enduring consequences of Operation Eagle Claw were not political or diplomatic, but military. The mission laid bare the deep flaws in America's armed forces. It was a patchwork of different branches, each with its own equipment, culture, and command structure. The lack of coordination was glaring. Delta Force soldiers flew on Air Force transports, supported by Navy pilots, yet no unified chain of command oversaw the mission. Planning was fragmented, communication was poor, and joint training had been nearly non-existent. The U.S. military, for all its resources, had failed to act as one. The humiliation forced a reckoning. Military leaders and politicians recognized that the nation could not afford another Desert One. Out of that recognition came sweeping reforms. In 1987, the United States created the Special Operations Command, or SOCOM, uniting elite forces under one command structure. For the first time, special operations had their own leadership, budget, and training programs. The Army also established the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, known as the Night Stalkers, whose sole mission was to perfect the art of flying dangerous missions in the dead of night. Their motto, "Night Stalkers Don't Quit," was a direct response to the tragedy in Iran. Beyond organizational changes, new laws reshaped the entire military. The Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986 overhauled the Department of Defense, breaking down barriers between branches and forcing them to train and fight jointly. Technology also advanced rapidly. The failures of Eagle Claw exposed weaknesses in navigation, night vision, helicopter reliability, and aerial refueling. Billions of dollars flowed into research, producing stealth helicopters, advanced avionics, satellite navigation, and improved special operations equipment. The results were evident in the decades that followed. The Gulf War of 1991 displayed a level of coordination and efficiency that stood in stark contrast to Desert One. Special operations units became central to U.S. strategy in conflicts from the Balkans to Afghanistan. And in May 2011, when Navy SEALs conducted a daring nighttime raid in Pakistan to kill Osama bin Laden, the operation was everything Eagle Claw had not been: flawlessly coordinated, technologically advanced, and executed with precision. In many ways, that mission was the redemption of Desert One. The memory of the 8 servicemen who died in the desert remains central to the story. Their sacrifice, though born of tragedy, forced the United States to confront its vulnerabilities. Historians often argue that without the failure at Desert One, the reforms that transformed America's military might never have been enacted. In that sense, the flames that consumed helicopters and aircraft in April 1980 illuminated more than just failure. They lit a path toward renewal. Operation Eagle Claw stands as a turning point in American history. It was a disaster that shook the nation's confidence, humiliated its leadership, and emboldened its enemies. Yet it also became the crucible in which a stronger, more agile military was forged. The story of Desert One is not only a tale of tragedy, but also one of transformation. Out of chaos and loss came the foundations of the modern U.S. military, proving that even in failure, a nation can find the seeds of future strength